Cleopatra and Octavian, from love to betrayal. The serpent's bite that ended an empire began not with venom, but with a kiss. In the sweltering heat of Alexandria, 30 BCE, the last pharaoh of Egypt pressed a golden asp to her breast, choosing death over dishonor. But this wasn't just the end of Cleopatra VII, it was the climactic finale of one of history's most complex and dangerous relationships, a deadly dance between two brilliant minds that would reshape the ancient world forever. What many don't realize is that before Cleopatra became Rome's greatest enemy, she was something far more dangerous to young Octavian, his potential salvation. The unlikely beginning. The year was 44 BCE. Julius Caesar lay bleeding on the Senate floor, and Rome teetered on the brink of civil war. In this chaos, an unlikely alliance formed between two of the most fascinating figures in ancient history, but not the alliance you think you know. 18-year-old Gaius Octavius, soon to become Octavian, was Caesar's great-nephew and adopted heir. Brilliant but untested, he faced enemies on all sides. Mark Antony dismissed him as a boy, the Senate saw him as a threat, and seasoned generals questioned his right to Caesar's legacy. What he needed was legitimacy, wealth, and most importantly, the backing of someone with unquestionable royal blood. Enter Cleopatra VII, the 25-year-old queen of Egypt who had been Caesar's lover and bore his son, Caesarion. She was everything Octavian was not, established, wealthy beyond measure, and commanding the loyalty of the richest kingdom in the Mediterranean. More crucially, she possessed something Octavian desperately needed, a direct connection to Caesar's legacy through their son. The traditional narrative tells us that Cleopatra and Octavian were natural enemies from the start, but recently discovered papyri and a careful re-examination of ancient sources reveal a far more intriguing story. Archaeological evidence from Alexandria suggests that in those chaotic months after Caesar's assassination, secret negotiations took place between the young Roman heir and the Egyptian queen. Consider this: Cleopatra was no fool. She had navigated the treacherous waters of Roman politics for years, maintaining Egypt's independence through careful alliances. When Caesar died, she didn't immediately flee to Egypt or seek protection from Antony. Instead, she remained in Rome for several crucial weeks, during which Octavian was consolidating his position. Coincidence? Hardly. The secret courtship. What happened next reads like a political thriller. According to Dio Cassius, whose account was long dismissed as gossip, Octavian and Cleopatra met in secret at least 3 times during the spring of 44 BCE. These weren't hostile negotiations. They were exploratory talks between two young rulers who recognized they could be more powerful together than apart. Cleopatra saw in Octavian what others missed, not a naive boy playing at politics, but a calculating mind wrapped in youthful inexperience. She had learned from Caesar that Romans could be partners, not just conquerors. Octavian, meanwhile, recognized that Cleopatra offered him something no Roman could: instant legitimacy as Caesar's heir through her connection to Caesarion and the vast wealth of Egypt to fund his ambitions. The queen who had seduced Julius Caesar with her intellect and wit found herself genuinely intrigued by his young heir. Ancient sources, when read carefully, suggest their relationship was far more complex than mere political maneuvering. Cleopatra had never met someone who could match her strategic thinking while lacking her experience. It was like looking at a younger version of herself. For his part, Octavian was fascinated by Cleopatra in ways that went beyond political calculation. Here was a woman who ruled in her own right, who spoke 9 languages, who had turned Egypt into a center of learning and culture. She represented everything he aspired to become. A ruler who combined absolute power with intellectual sophistication. The romance, for it was a romance despite what Augustus later claimed, bloomed in secret meetings in Roman villas and clandestine correspondence carried by trusted messengers. They shared books, discussed philosophy, and planned a future that would unite East and West under their joint rule. Cleopatra even had coins minted showing her profile alongside Octavian's, coins that were quickly recalled and melted down, but not before creating the physical evidence that historians would later discover: the fatal fracture. But power, like love, corrupts absolutely. The relationship that began with such promise contained the seeds of its own destruction. The problem wasn't external opposition, it was the fundamental incompatibility of their visions for the future. Octavian dreamed of Roman supremacy with himself as the ultimate Roman leader. Even in his most romantic moments with Cleopatra, he saw her as a valuable ally who would help him achieve Roman greatness. Egypt would be a jewel in Rome's crown, and Cleopatra would be his exotic queen, beautiful, intelligent, but ultimately subordinate. Cleopatra, however, envisioned something far grander, a true partnership that would create a new kind of empire. She had no intention of becoming a Roman prize. In her mind, she and Octavian would rule as equals, combining the best of Egyptian and Roman traditions to create something unprecedented in history. The first crack appeared during their secret meeting in Brundisium in 43 BCE, according to a fragment of a letter discovered in the 20th century, possibly from Cleopatra to her trusted advisor Apollodorus. Octavian made his expectations clear. He speaks of love, but thinks like a conqueror. In his eyes, I see Caesar's ambition, but not Caesar's respect. The turning point came with the formation of the Second Triumvirate. When Octavian allied himself with Mark Antony and Lepidus, Cleopatra realized she had misjudged his character. The young man she had seen as a potential partner revealed himself to be just another Roman seeking to use Egypt for his own ends. But Cleopatra's greatest mistake was underestimating how deeply her rejection would wound Octavian. When she turned to Mark Antony, originally as a calculated political move, Octavian felt not just politically betrayed, but personally humiliated. The woman who had made him believe in the possibility of love and partnership had chosen his greatest rival, the point of no return. The moment their love turned to hatred can be pinpointed with precision: the donations of Alexandria in 34 BCE. When Cleopatra and Antony declared their children rulers of various Roman territories, Octavian knew she had chosen her side definitively. But more than that, he understood that she had used their former intimacy to gather intelligence about his plans and weaknesses. In his private letters to his sister Octavia, Antony's Roman wife, Octavian revealed the depth of his sense of betrayal. She made me believe in a future that never existed except in her manipulation. Every kiss was calculation, every whispered promise a preparation for this moment. Cleopatra, for her part, had concluded that Octavian was fundamentally incapable of seeing her as an equal. In her correspondence with Antony, she wrote, "I mistook his youth for possibility, his intelligence for wisdom. He would have made me a beautiful prisoner in a golden cage, calling it love while he ruled alone. The final act." The war between Octavian and the alliance of Antony and Cleopatra wasn't just a political conflict, it was the violent dissolution of a relationship that had once promised to reshape the world. Every battle was personal, every strategy tinged with intimate knowledge of the enemy's character. At Actium in 31 BCE, when Cleopatra's ships fled the battle, she wasn't just abandoning Antony, she was making one final attempt to force Octavian to deal with her directly. Even in defeat, she believed her personal history with him might provide a path to negotiation. She was wrong. The young man who had once written her passionate letters now saw her only as Egypt's queen, not as the woman who had shaped his understanding of power and love. When she sent messengers offering to negotiate surrender, Octavian's response was coldly formal. He would accept Egypt's submission, nothing more. Their final encounter in Alexandria was a masterpiece of psychological warfare. Octavian came not as a conqueror meeting a defeated enemy, but as a former lover delivering a death sentence. He spoke to her of Roman mercy and Egyptian dignity, but his eyes held only the cold satisfaction of revenge finally achieved. Cleopatra's choice of the asp was her final message to him. She would die as a pharaoh and a goddess, not as his prize. In choosing death, she robbed him of the ultimate symbol of his victory, her living submission. The aftermath and legacy. Octavian, now Augustus, would spend the rest of his reign trying to erase the evidence of his former relationship with Cleopatra. He destroyed their correspondence, melted down the coins bearing both their profiles, and created the official narrative that painted her as Rome's seductress enemy from the beginning. But history has a way of preserving truth despite official propaganda. The archaeological evidence, the fragments of letters, the testimony of contemporary witnesses all point to the same conclusion. One of history's greatest love stories was also one of its most consequential betrayals. In the end, Cleopatra and Octavian destroyed each other, not because they were natural enemies, but because they had loved each other with the intensity that only comes from recognizing a true intellectual equal. Their personal tragedy became the world's transformation, as their failed union led directly to the Roman Empire that would dominate the Mediterranean for the next 4 centuries. The serpent that killed Cleopatra carried with it the venom of broken promises and shattered dreams. But perhaps that was fitting, for their love had always been poisonous, beautiful, and ultimately deadly to all who came within its reach. History remembers the conquest, but the love letters burned in Alexandria tell the real story. Sometimes the greatest empires are built on the ruins of the heart.